The moment I saw Claire leaning over that crumbling stone wall, reaching down with her bare hand toward a wild lynx, I felt my stomach twist. The animal had leapt, claws scraping against the ivy, and when it latched onto her wrist, everything changed in a heartbeat. What looked like a desperate climb turned into something far more complicated. I could see it clearly from where I stood. Its front paw wasn't just hanging there. A thin wire loop had cinched tight around its leg, wedged into the cracks of the stone. The lynx wasn't only trying to climb, it was trapped. Claire winced as the claws cut into her skin, but she refused to let go. She shouted back to me, "Jason, grab the strap from my bag. Tie it to that branch now." I scrambled, yanking out a climbing strap we'd brought for training, looping it around a thick piece of root that jutted from the ruins. Claire hooked her foot through it to steady herself as the lynx thrashed, the wire digging deeper into its flesh. My hands shook as I dialed the number for the Wildlife Service. "This is Jason Miller. We've got a lynx caught in a snare by the old paper mill ruins. My friend has hold of it. It's hurt. Please hurry." The dispatcher told us to stay clear, to wait for officers. But how could we just let it dangle there? Claire's jaw was clenched, her voice steady but strained. "I can't let go, Jason. If I do, it might rip its own leg apart." I pressed my shoulder against her hip, bracing her so she wouldn't slip. Minutes dragged like hours. The lynx's eyes darted wildly, breath ragged, and the smell of blood mixed with rust and ivy. Finally, a vehicle skidded onto the gravel path. Officer Daniels jumped out with a heavy blanket and gloves, another worker right behind her. She locked eyes with us. "Hold tight. We've got it from here." They moved fast, draping the blanket over the lynx, muffling its panic. One officer clamped the wire with cutters, and I heard the sharp snap as the loop gave way. Claire pulled back, cradling her scratched wrist, her arms trembling. The lynx collapsed into the blanket, still breathing hard, but finally free of the trap. Officer Daniels shook her head as she examined the wire. "This isn't the first one we've found around here. Someone's setting these snares deliberately." Claire's voice cracked. "Who would do that? It's cruel." We followed them as they carried the animal to the truck, its paw wrapped temporarily in gauze. They promised to take it to the rehabilitation center where Dr. Harris would assess the damage. I could see the weight lift from Claire's shoulders once the truck door closed, though her wrist was bleeding through her shirt. At the center later that evening, Dr. Harris showed us the paw, swollen, raw, but healing once the wire was gone. She explained that with a few days of antibiotics and rest, the lynx had a real chance. Claire's scratches needed stitches, and even as the doctor patched her up, she whispered it was worth it. I couldn't have let go. Over the next week, Claire and I helped the officers mark areas in the woods where other traps might be hidden. We found more, old rusted wires tangled in roots, a few fresh ones hidden under leaves. Each discovery deepened our anger, but also pulled the community together. Pastor John organized volunteers to comb the trails, remove debris, and post warning signs. On Sunday, he stood in front of his small congregation, holding up the very snare we had cut from the lynx. "This is what we're up against, and this is what we can change, together." The room was quiet, people bowing their heads. Then came donations, hands raised to help, children running with bags to collect scraps of wire. It wasn't just about one lynx anymore. It was about reclaiming the forest from cruelty. A week later, Dr. Harris called us back. The lynx was strong again, restless in its pen, ready to return to the wild. Claire's stitches were out, her wrist lined with scars, but healing. We drove together to a clearing where Officer Daniels and her team had prepared the release. When the crate opened, the lynx hesitated, then bounded into the undergrowth, its body moving with power despite the faint limp. For a split second, it turned its head toward Claire. No words, no human fantasy of gratitude, just a glance. And then it was gone. Claire's voice was low as we stood in the quiet. "We did the right thing, Jason. Not just for it, but for all of them." I nodded, watching the last ripple of branches where the lynx disappeared. The forest was still again, but it didn't feel empty. It felt alive, guarded not just by its own wild creatures, but by people who had finally understood their place, to protect, not to exploit. The scars on Claire's wrist will never fade completely. Neither will the memory of that moment on the wall, when she reached out and refused to let go. And maybe that's the point. Some moments mark you forever, not to wound, but to remind you what it means to stand between cruelty and hope.